This is your first task today. Have your first team meeting now, introduce yourself, and maybe as the hardest task today, find a name for your team. You're doing a movie recommendation service for the rest of the semester, so think something like Netflix, where you're the team that's recommending movies. So I would recommend a movie-related name. Doesn't have to be, but find a team name. So introduce yourself, find a time for a first team meeting, hopefully this week, and find a name, and post it to Slack. All right. I want to talk about teamwork today, and particularly about teamwork in student teams. Who has bad experience working in a team? Who does not have bad experience working in a team? Have you worked in a team? No? Can you share some of those? You don't need to name names, but what are some of the things that were kind of problematic in the past of working in teams?
Like complete unengagement.
Somebody completely unengaged, not participating?
Hour and a half late to our meeting.
Sorry? Oh.
An hour and a half late to our meeting.
Oh, an hour and a half late to a meeting, okay. I thought endless team meetings, maybe an hour and a half, but zero communication and accountability, okay. Somebody who's doing everything by themselves, not sharing or not helping or not trusting other people. And then you do everything with them, or they're just not doing anything at all? Have you had bad experience outside of a classroom with a team? Okay, two different perspectives, bad communication, not negotiating. Somebody who yells at other people, okay. Back.
Overslept at the final presentation.
Overslept, okay. In a corporate environment? Okay. And
person was just checking your work intentionally and then sharing that what you did something wrong.
Okay.
Oh, with everyone else.
Very nice. That sounds very mean, of checking, looking for mistakes in somebody else's work to point it out during the meeting. Okay, so teamwork doesn't have to be like this. There are lots of problems, and teamwork problems are pretty well understood, and there are lots of strategies to deal with this. We don't expect that we can just throw you in a team and then everything works magically. We're trying to give you a few hints up front, and then we're trying to help you through the semester. So what's going to happen is you stay together with this team through 4 milestones. Most of those milestones are 2 weeks long. So throughout the rest of the semester, there are 2 more individual assignments, but the rest is in teams, in this team. And I would say, speaking from past experience, I think about 1/3 of our teams usually have some teamwork issues that get back to me. About 2 out of those, so about 10 of you, 10 teams, about 2 of those usually are pretty severe. Most teams can figure this out eventually, and there are 2 or so where I have to intervene in a more deliberate way. A class is a good place to experience teamwork issues and experiment with what you can try to do to address them. What we're trying to do is empower you to address your own teamwork issues to the degree that you can. And we're going to talk about this a little bit, about what you can do. There are certain things where we will intervene because it's outside of your control. There's very little that you can do if somebody never responds to you. But we want you to try and engage and try to improve things. This is, in a way, a safe space. If you do this to colleagues, kind of experimenting with addressing teamwork issues in a production team feels very dangerous. In this class, most of these people you don't see anymore after this semester, right? So you can try things, and we will help you through this. So let's see. I have a few things that are mostly boilerplate up front, but teamwork is kind of inevitable. We're talking about so many different things in this class, and also any software project that we're building these days is too big for a single person to entirely build on their own. Maybe now with agents you can push this a little bit further, but also too big for any single person to understand on their own. So it's very common that you will need expertise, that you will need teams just to scale up and to cover the different skills. There's a lot of talk of unicorns, people who have all those skills around, but again, they are rare. They're maybe mythical, and they're very expensive to keep in your organization. So I think the much better strategy is to work in teams with people who work well together. Right? So virtually every software project these days is done in teams. With machine learning, you bring in more specialized skills, and you really want to work together. Also, working in a good team can be fun. Even though a lot of you shared kind of bad experiences in a team, working in a good team can be a good experience, and you can learn from each other too. I want to talk briefly about 2 common teamwork problems. There are many more out there, but those are maybe the ones that are relevant or very common for student teams. One is groupthink, and I think this comic is a good explanation. Has anybody experienced a situation like this? It's like extreme conflict avoidance. Everybody agrees. Another version of this is, the hippo problem, the highest paid person's opinion. Have you seen this kind of thing? Anything you're willing to share?
People just like go by who they like trust, and they don't really, they're afraid to like disagree.
Mm-hmm. This also happens in student teams regularly when there's one person who has a strong opinion and nobody wants to speak up, or everybody else is unsure, so let's go with that, or go with the first option that somebody mentions. Right? Groupthink is the avoidance of conflict, minimizing conflict, and often leads to not exploring alternatives. You just go with the first opinion or with the person that the hippo says, the opinion that the hippo says, and sometimes it actively suppresses dissenting views. That somebody is loud in a meeting and just says, oh yeah, we don't need to think about that part, right? Who cares about fairness? Let's deploy now. And this leads often to irrational decision making. There's a couple of reasons this is well explored, often high cohesion, structural faults and situational context, but it's also something where we're just conflict avoidant. So we are rather agreeing with somebody. I don't know how many of you are conflict avoidant. I certainly am. I think most people are naturally. And it's not always a good thing. Conflict is not necessarily bad, at least some level. You don't want to disagree with everybody on everything all the time, right? But if there is actually something that you disagree with and you don't speak up and you ignore things, it's actually something that I see in student teams all the time and also in corporate teams, that people are unhappy with the situation for a long time, but don't bring it up. I see good peer reviews in milestone 1, milestone 2, and then milestone 3 is where it collides because people are fed up. This is, for a long time, people avoid the conflict of speaking up. With machine learning, it's pretty common that we just go with hype technology. We don't question our decisions. Let's use LLMs because everybody, or agents because everybody's using this, right? So it must be right. What are some strategies that you maybe have seen or can think of how you can break this cycle of conflict avoidance and everybody just violently agreeing with each other or agreeing with the loudest person?
So usually what happens when the first person speaks and the rest of the team is saying, oh, maybe that person knows more, so I shouldn't speak up. So it's really helpful to brainstorm in silence on our own document and then move together also.
Yeah, this is a common strategy, sometimes known as planning poker too, where everybody writes down their own version first and shares them at the same time, or shares what they have written down before they start discussing. Right? So in a team meeting, don't immediately start discussing the first opinion. explore alternatives, or if this is happening, that somebody is dominating the discussion, specifically do the strategy where you ask people to write this down during the meeting or before the meeting, before you come to this, so that you actually collect the opinions without biasing each other. Any other ideas?
There's this thing about being a devil's advocate.
Yep.
Where you for sure get the cons of the situation.
Yep.
People are able to think.
So the devil's advocate is a way of assigning somebody the responsibility of bringing up alternative views, right? And you can say, I'm taking the devil's advocate position here of this will not scale or something like this, so that you're shielding yourself from saying, I don't disagree with you, but somebody should think of the opinion, right? If I have this role of really thinking through the counter arguments, then I will bring this up. And you can assign somebody that responsibility, that somebody in each team should explicitly, for every decision, think through the alternatives. There's a lot of other things. Diversity in team compositions can help if not everybody has the same background. A culture of open conflicts. Not shouting matches every single meeting, right? But a culture where people are not afraid to bring up dissenting views, where they trust each other, right? That this is done in good faith. There's a devil's advocate. Outsider experts can help. Always asking for a second solution before committing something, and so on. Makes sense so far? I'm going to go through them pretty quickly because I want you to kind of think through teamwork issues on your own. The other thing is social loafing. That's the academic name for somebody on your team doesn't do much. Right? This has been studied actually extensively in a bunch of contexts. The more people you involve in a rope pulling competition, the less each person individually pulls. The larger the group is that's supposed to cheer for something or clap, the less they clap individually. In an academic context or in also any teamwork, it's somebody just doesn't pull their weight, right? And it's kind of not noticed because it's a big group. So social loafing is the idea that some people exert less efforts within a group. And there's all kinds of reasons. This diffusion of responsibility. If I'm in a big group and I don't do much, nobody will notice that it's me, right? Motivation, maybe I don't care. Missing recognition. I pulled heroics. I rescued the team project last time and nobody noticed, right? Other people were not doing this. It's avoiding the sucker effect, right? I don't want to be the one that's always doing the work. Sounds familiar? What can you do about it? Maybe in student teams, or let's say you build a startup and you don't want this to happen in your teams. What can you avoid that people will stop contributing and just swimming in a crowd and not feel responsible?
Have like own projects or sections of the project for each person where they have to take responsibility for that part.
Yep. Some sort of accountability where you break down work into smaller pieces and you assign clear responsibility so that it's clear who did the work and also who didn't do the work. What else?
Like regular updates on what people are working on, which is
Yep. Or some sort of stand-up meeting or just good communication where you're aware, where you recognize what people are working on, where it's not just you silently disappear. What else?
During the team meeting, so if somebody's absent, they can follow up.
Okay, take notes and help them to follow up if they're absent. If they don't want to be there, will they follow up?
Structure your board so that no one gets explicitly blocked by someone else what they're trying to do.
Okay. Help with dependencies between project things so that you don't get blocked. That's if somebody can't do anything, right, rather than doesn't want to do anything, but yeah. Any idea how you motivate your team members? What do you do if somebody's just not particularly motivated for a project?
try to find something they are good at doing and that matches what we need.
Yep.
Because if you ask them something that they are not really good at, they get frustrated.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, match what you ask of them with what they like, what they're good at. Give them some agency in choosing what they're working on, right? If you just assign somebody work, they don't want to do it, it's not very motivating. Bring snacks to group meetings, okay? This is actually, if you're interested in motivation, I can recommend this book quite a lot. It's a popular science book of what motivates creative people, and it's usually not money, right? So incentives don't really work for creative people, at least. They boil it down to these three things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, give them some autonomy in choosing what they're working on. Don't tell them exactly in small steps what to do. Mastery, let them get good at something. Let them do something that they enjoy, that they spend a lot of time becoming an expert in. We as humans often like that. So don't just give them new tasks all the time unless they really want to do the learning. And then purpose, do something that aligns with your vision or that you feel like makes a difference in the world, which may not work on every team. If you're working on online ads and you're not passionate about online ads, maybe you do it for the money, but social loafing, I think, is more common than, right, you do the thing that you do to stick around. Or maybe you find value in the other things. So a couple of things, and I think you can think about these as teamwork strategies also in student teams. Involve all team members, don't shut people out, and try physical co-location. Try to work together in meetings for some parts. That helps also raise accountability. You can't just disappear. Assign specific tasks with individual responsibilities. Break it down and be very clear who's supposed to do what by when. We're actually forcing you to do that. Provide choices. So don't assign people what they're supposed to do. Give them some agency in choosing. Promote involvement, challenge developers, let them do something challenging, and then some sort of review feedback can be useful. And also just team forming exercises that people want to be part of a team. Smaller teams work better than larger teams too. Right, so I think teams above 7, we don't know how to make that work pretty much. Most of your teams are teams of 5 in this class. All right. With this, I want to bring this back to you and student teams. What I want to do next is a pre-mortem. So it's like a post-mortem, which you do in software projects after something went wrong. Right? So the server crashed or the team project didn't get delivered. So we meet afterward to figure out what went wrong. What I want you to do next is a pre-mortem, which you do before something goes wrong. So you anticipate there's one of these problems might happen. And you think about what will you do back then, or how will you have avoided that in the first place. So we talked about you all have maybe not the best experience, right? And I can show you this is not unique. I think I don't have to do this, but this is from team feedback that we got in the past, right? M was very pleasant and would contribute while in meeting. Outside of them, he didn't complete the work he said he would, did not reach out to others, provide an update on what he was unable to do. When asked on the night of the assignment was due, he completed a portion of the task that he would after he had completed the rest of it. Procrastinated with the work till the last minute, otherwise okay. I think these are not surprising, right? So you probably have seen similar experience. I've seen these in this class today. I think these are the most common frustrations that I see over the years again and again. No visible progress until the last minute, late work, incomplete or low quality solutions at integration. LLMs don't help with this, or coding agents actually makes this worse. Unresponsive team members, passive or uninterested team members without initiatives, and people who just need lots of reminder and helping. I think there's a common sources for a lot of these things, like different priorities. Maybe you don't really care about MLOps that much, and OS is really kicking your ass, right? So you really need to focus on those assignments. So different priorities, or also outside of class. I have dance class tonight. I have actually literally had students complain to me that a team member wasn't motivated because they would leave to go to dance class. Have hobbies. Go to dance class, but maybe also make sure that you don't leave other team members hanging by doing things before. Different abilities. They are sometimes incompetent or nearly incompetent team members. Different working styles. I think this is a big one. I asked you this on the teamwork survey of who's a planner versus who's deadline driven. And I think about a quarter of you admits that they're late and deadline driven. And I tried very hard to not mix you in teams. So, if you said you're a planner and somebody on your project is very late, they probably also said they were a planner, but you can talk about this. There are people who are very effective being deadline driven. It's just they're driving the other people nuts if they want to plan, right? Different communication preferences. I don't deal well with notifications. I turn them off on almost all things. So I usually try to get back to people over email within 24 hours. I'm not somebody who wants to be available all the time, right? Some people do that. They need a reminder now in a minute. And the last thing, I haven't seen that much, actually. So let's do the pre-mortem here. Let me give you a couple of scenarios. And as a team, in your team, I want you to pick one of these scenarios and think about, so if that scenario happens, what would you avoid that this doesn't happen in the first place? How can you as a team avoid this problem? And then if you're not successful in avoiding it, so the problem occurs anyway, what are you doing then? Right? How are you recovering from this, or how are you going forward? So here's a problem. One team member has very little technical expertise and is struggling with basic Python scripts and the Unix shell. It is faster for other team members to take over the task rather than helping them. Scenario 2. You divide the work, but when you try to integrate the evening before the deadline, you learn that one team member has failed to complete their task. They tried the day before, but got stuck with a dependency problem. After last-minute stress at the last assignment, your team agrees to start earlier and to integrate at a milestone days before the deadline to leave a buffer. Yet you see little progress from half the team in GitHub and hardly anybody responds on Slack. Little is done on the agreed milestone. The work gets done before the deadline, but with the same stress as in the last assignment. This homework is low priority for one team member. They rarely contribute beyond the bare minimum at the last minute. And then it's low priority. The rest of the team grudgingly compensates and achieves full points for the assignment. They do not feel comfortable criticizing the student as it may negatively affect their grade. So those are the 4 scenarios. In your team, pick one of them and talk about, A, how would you avoid this so that it doesn't get to this point? And then if you failed avoiding it, it happens, how are you reacting? Instructions clear? Work as a team, maybe 6 minutes, post to Slack, the usual, and then we come back. All right, I would like to hear from 1 or 2 groups about what you talked about and what your plan is.
What's the plan?
So we decided that we would assess each mentor's skills early so that we better understand what they're weak at and what they're strong at. And then not only that, but we would give more time to people with like tasks that they struggle at, and make sure that if they're assigned that task, make sure it's like non-integral and it doesn't cause any like dependencies for other later processes.
Am I hearing correctly that you're suggesting to put the incompetent people on stuff that doesn't matter?
It could matter, but just make sure it does not interfere with other.
Okay.
I will
It's a polite version of that.
I would say, Christian, a very common thing that will happen to a number of you is you're going to say, okay, what framework should we use for this? Someone's going to say, I know this one. You're going to pick that one. That
Groupthink.
person,
Groupthink.
that person is then going to be the poor slob at the end, putting the whole thing together, right? Because if there's not the knowledge sharing early. So the problem is that you either pick a thing that none of you know, right? Which is a choice. And then I'm not sorry that one. Or if you pick a thing that one of you knows, you gotta deal with that very, very early so that one person's life is not miserable among things.
Sorry, before we move on, if it doesn't help, what are you doing then? This was the other question here.
I guess we would get assistance for that.
Okay, get assistance, help them in some form. Okay. Somebody else? Some other group? I would not recommend it for
Neither
a team project.
No, nor in American.
So we sort of tackling the third problem with not leaving the entire milestone to be completed before the next meeting. Instead, we thought of having recurring meetings across and having checkpoints where each one is accountable for a particular checkpoint. And if that checkpoint is not complete, and then we will reallocate and understand what the problem really is.
Great planning. What happens if everybody or half the team ignores the checkpoints and is late anyway?
I mean, we will have to first understand why they're late, because half of the times it could really be that they're technically stuck somewhere. So we will have to understand, and if they are really technically challenged in that particular area, then we can reallocate.
Yep. Sometimes it's just an interview or homework in another class. Okay. One more group?
We chose the second problem. First of all, I think we shouldn't be integrating things evening before the deadline. I think you should have a buffer to it, because things can go wrong and you never know. That's the first thing. Second, yes, I believe that currently we're doing a project and we're using something like you post every day on like what you did yesterday, what you did today. Do you have any blockers, and what is the goal you're trying to achieve? And this is like a project charter, you sign a contract, so I'm assuming that everyone abides by it.
Strong assumption, yeah. What do you do when it fails?
I think the first thing is not really blame anyone, because it's very time critical. So I think it's not going to help us. So like we reassign tasks between ourselves and also have a meeting and discuss with the person on what actually happened. Because I feel like, I mean, if it's a repetitive thing, it's something, but if it's just once, I think it is something else. Probably talk to them, ask them if there are any concerns we should be addressing. And yeah, moving forward, I think we should keep like 2 days buffer and integrate stuff first, so yeah.
Yep. Similar to the last team, right? It sounds very nice to always have 2 days of buffer, and then the reality hits. I'll ask you maybe later in the semester how it actually went. All right.
Although I do want to say the idea of going pre-post-mortem is very helpful
Yep.
actually in technical contexts, right? Like it's hard to reframe your language, right? But you want to say like, oh, why didn't you do it? Like, okay, so what happened with the deadline such that it wasn't done, right? Like it just. You're about to talk about difficult conversations, but like thinking about it as, hey, the system fails, not the person, and how can you change the system, right? Because you can't change people. Might help you have some difficult conversations more easily. Because a lot of this boils down to like teams not talking to each other in a constructive way on time.
Right. So this is the thing that I want to get to now is if things don't go well, how to have that conversation so that things don't blow up. I want to give you some pointers, and then I want you to role play and try it. I haven't done this before. I want to see how this works as role playing. So again, if you want to learn more about this, there's a book I can recommend about having difficult conversation. This is mostly how do you bring up issues so that the other person doesn't explode and that you're not afraid of having that conversation. I think a very common thing, as I mentioned earlier, is conflict avoidance. I see this in student teams all the time. I see this in other places all the time. I'm not great at bringing things up, and I'm avoiding conflict just like the other next person. But this is a really useful skill. I've seen so many teams, we just talked about this, where everybody pretends everything is fine until somebody really can't bear it anymore. And sometimes there are 3 people mad at one team member, and that one team member doesn't know about it because nobody told them, right? Or one person is mad about other people and has never told them, so of course they're not changing their behavior, right? So if you want something to change, have a conversation. And there are a couple of tips here that I think fundamentally change the tone of the situation and can help a lot to de-escalate this and have this be productive. So let's see. 3 things mostly. Focus on problem solving, not figuring out what actually happened. In a way, if you're late at integration and you're annoyed at somebody being constantly late, it doesn't really matter why. At least not for blaming them in retrospect, right? It doesn't even matter what the facts of the situation are. Look forward. What can we change in the future that this doesn't happen again? This will take blame out so much. You can say, I had a bad experience here. I would like to explore what we can do in the next milestone so that this doesn't happen again, rather than trying to do some lawyering about who was really at fault. You were late, I didn't tell you, you didn't remind me, right? So this isn't really productive. The second thing is try to talk about yourself. Try to not make factual statement about what other people did. Try to avoid saying, you implemented this incorrectly, or you were late. Talk about how it affected yourself, right? So I was stressed at the last minute because I got work late. I could not integrate it further. I lost sleep. Or I was really annoyed, or I felt annoyed about the code quality because I had to repair things or write very lengthy code reviews. It's very hard for somebody else to argue with your feelings, right? It's how you perceive the interaction that they can essentially not disagree with. Once you start saying factual statements about them, you were late, they can try arguing against it, right? I was on time, you just didn't see it, or things like this, right? Feelings matter. Feelings actually matter probably more than facts in this place for having these kind of conversations. Express how this situation affected you and why you would like to see some change based on that. And try to be specific about what you experienced. Like, I was up until midnight, I was looking for pull requests and there was none, or I was reading through all this code. Focus on the impact. Never imply intent, right? Don't say you intended to be late or you sabotaged the project. Even if they did, this is not a constructive conversation. You're just starting to blame each other, and they will shut down over this, right? Because they might not have intended this, and if they intended this, they wouldn't admit it anyway, right? So focus on how it affected you, and that's very, very hard to argue with and has a much more productive conversation. And finally, recognize and accept each other's perspectives and realities. You tell them how it affected you, but also listen when they tell their story, right? Active listening can be a very powerful tool where it's very simple. When somebody tells you something, let them speak and then summarize briefly what you heard. Right? So they tell you, oh, it was stressful and so on, and you just summarize, oh, I understand you had a very busy weekend with the other homework assignment and this was an exception and you don't hope this will be happening again. Even if you disagree, right, try to show that you listened. This will help make them feel heard. Does this make sense? So what I would like you to do now is do some role playing. Pick the situation that you just talked about, and nothing what you did worked. And now you feel like you need to confront somebody about it. You don't need to post to Slack for this. Form groups of 2 or 3 people. One person is confronting the other person. The person being confronted doesn't need to play along necessarily. You can be offended. But the person doing the confrontation, person number 1 here, should try to de-escalate and try to follow those 3 steps. And if you have 3 people, 1 person can observe and kind of give some feedback after it. And then I tell you in a minute or 2 to rotate. You want to try that? I know it's awkward. Try it anyway. Go for it. So, stop. I want you to switch one more time, and this time person 1 does everything wrong. Do the opposite of this. Let it escalate and see how that feels as a contrast. Thanks for participating. I think you don't need to torture each other more. Thanks for playing along. I hope this was somewhat useful. I don't quite know. It was an experiment. At least some of you seem to have fun. I think not being silently grumpy, but bringing it up is a really good skill. You don't need to do this immediately, but speak up if you are unhappy in a team, not just to the core staff, to your team members. And there are ways to do this without having it escalate, and I would like you to try this. If you are unhappy within the team, actively try to have a conversation. You can tell them, I want to have a difficult conversation with you. Can we find some time? Can we speak about this? And now, in the last couple of minutes, I want to talk a little bit about how we are formally arranging this in this course and how we're trying to support you. So we want to give your team as much flexibility as possible. You in your team should set your own priorities and your own policies and figure out how you're working together. I think it's a good idea to have a project manager in your team. You can rotate this. We're not forcing you to do this. Not everybody in your team will contribute equally. As long as the team is okay with that, we're okay with that. Right? People have strengths and weaknesses, use them. If somebody does much more project management and less coding, if you're fine with that, we're fine with that. Right? What we will intervene is this where, in practice, you have very little chance to actually do something about it. A difficult conversation will only get you so far. Right? Try to do what you agreed to do by the time that you agreed to, and if you cannot, seek help and communicate early and clearly. Right? So this is the thing that we're going to penalize you if you're not doing that and other people complain. This is what we call team citizenship. This is the kind of thing, if this happens in a company, somebody is just not responding, they're promising to do something and then don't, there's almost nothing that you can do other than to complain to your boss. And in this case, I'm going to be your boss, right? Or your team mentor is going to be your boss. So there are certain things where we will intervene. If somebody is technically incompetent, not my problem. Deal with it. Figure it out in your team, right? If somebody is late but tells you about this and you agreed to this, maybe you shouldn't have agreed to this, right? But if somebody is just not communicating, they're committing to do something and then they don't, that's the thing where you have very little leverage, and that's where we threaten to affect your grade, essentially. Right? So These are the things that we're looking for. Be responsive and responsible in a team. Come to meetings on time. Participate actively. Stick to commitment. Work on the assigned task. It doesn't need to mean that you need to finish them or be capable of doing all of the agreed tasks, but at least try. And when you have problems, you should reach out, replan, communicate early, be proactive. Right? If you fail to do a task that you agreed to, and you communicated with that early, gave the rest of the team a chance to do something, that's fine. If you fail to do this and tell them at the last minute, that's not fine. Right? So we will adjust grades for team citizenship issues, particularly these. Lack of communication, if people say they never get a response to you. And what response is reasonable, again, depends on what you agree on in a team. Right? In the team, you can say, everybody should respond to Slack messages within 10 minutes. I think that's a very stupid thing to agree to. But if you do that and you're late to that, you didn't stick to the agreement, right? Think about what's reasonable in your team. Next day, same day, something like this, and then hold people accountable to this. Disrespectful or dismissive communication, not attending team meetings without an excuse. Again, if you agree on this, somebody has an interview, something, right, that's fine. But if you just everybody waits there for you to show up, that's disrespectful. Blowing internal deadlines without communication. Failing to complete agreed tasks without timely communication. Right, so those are the kind of things that I think within a team you have very little chance to deal with this other than to complain and take a late day or panic around midnight and put in a lot of work. We're trying to help. Please come and talk to us. Teamwork we think of as a very important part of this lecture. That's why I'm spending a whole class on this just to introduce this and we're going to cover this later. Each team is assigned a TA as a mentor. You're going to meet with them typically once or twice, more often if you ask, and then after each milestone there's a debrief meeting that we want you to do with them, talk about how things went. We have a survey at the end of each milestone too, where we ask for team citizenship issues, not other things. And we will adjust grades if we have to. Right? So there is this survey at the end of every milestone. It's a Google form where you talk about each team member, whether they make one of those problems that I just listed. They're not responsive, they skip team meetings without, and so on. And then you can grade them as how much you think they're a good team member. Most of the time, everybody rates everybody else as a good team member and everything is fine. If it's not fine, we will encourage you to bring this up, at least in the debrief meeting, and might talk to you about this, but we will adjust grades. There is a formula for this. There's a form online that you can play with if you want. I can show you this here. It looks something like this. So if somebody has rated you as needs improvement, there's a -2% penalty. If multiple people are really annoyed at you, this can add up to pretty large penalties. Okay. This follows a formula from some paper. There's documentation how that works if you care. Right, so we try to push you to bring up issues, but we will not bring up issues for you during the team meeting. Right? We will try to help you to have a difficult conversation. We will not have this for you. If nobody speaks up, you see this in the penalty in the grade, if people complain silently about this. And I've had these conversations repeatedly where somebody comes to my office and asks me, why did I get a deduction here? I will not tell you, talk to your team. Right? This is a forcing function for you to have a conversation. I often waive penalties if there's a miscommunication or something, but I want you to have this conversation, and this peer grading is one way of having that. And if it's not something that can be addressed by your team in your team, then we will adjust grades. It doesn't happen very often that I actually adjust grades, but it is there if something really goes bad in your team. I don't think adversarial peer grading is much of an issue, but this sometimes comes up. I don't want to rate somebody poorly because they will rate me poorly. Please don't do that. And I think we will also notice when that happens and intervene. Right? And avoiding conflict. So if somebody is really not pulling their weight in a team and is a really bad team member, please say so in the team feedback survey. because otherwise things will not change and you're going to be frustrated. One more thing that we're trying to do as a positive thing this semester is in the debriefing meeting after the first 3 milestones, you can get up to 3 bonus points if you convince the TA that you went beyond the comfort zone. What we mean here is we don't just want you to divide the work, somebody integrates it, and everybody knows their own part. If you do things counter to your experience, so for example, you haven't much machine learning experience, but you explicitly want to do the machine learning part in this project. Or somebody has done a lot of monitoring in the past and they could just knock that out, that part of the project out, but you choose to do something else. We value this with bonus points. You can help each other and so on, right? But we want to encourage you. And the other thing is, if everybody else should know roughly what everybody else did, so that it's not just you. This is optional, you don't have to do this, but if you want to push yourself, we encourage that. Any questions on any of these things? All right. Then what I have are just a few final slides to talk about a few things to get started. I think it's really useful to have a meta conversation in the beginning about how you want to communicate. We ask you to write this down in a team contract. Most of you will ignore that team contract afterward, but we will remind you of it, right? At least have that conversation in the beginning. Think about how you want to communicate. Different teams are very different, and you can choose whatever you like. We're not prescribing Slack or anything else. And think about what your expectations are. How often, how quickly do you want people to respond? And try to be realistic, right? You all have other classes, other responsibilities, and so on. It's daily enough? Do you expect people to respond on the weekend? We don't set expectations for you. Your team should decide this, right? And avoiding conflict, right? So not just some person says everybody should respond in 10 minutes. Don't just all say yes if you don't agree, right? Is there a way to reach people for urgent messages, right? Like if it's close to the deadline, is there a special way? I would recommend have a somewhat regular meeting time, once or twice a week. You might find it useful to work together. You may not, depends on the team, what you're comfortable with. And really think about intermediate deadlines and how to break up the work. And write that down. In the first milestone, we make you write that down. Later, we're much more relaxed about this, but we would encourage you to actually write that down. Right. Use the different strengths and weaknesses in your team. Every team has at least one person who rated themselves as a software engineer and at least one person who rated themselves as a data scientist. Other than avoiding that people who work late on something or plan, not mixing those, I try to make teams diverse along these dimensions. So try to figure out what people are good at, what they know, and make use of that responsibility. If you haven't done this before, some form of team management, project management is actually quite a bit of work, and you might decide that somebody should do this. Often somebody naturally does it, but you can also rotate that work and think about who does this kind of thing. And try to write down who does what by when, and have people agree on this. Don't just write this down for somebody else, right? Have people write this down, and then try to have this in a place where you have a single source of truth, where everybody can see this, where there's maybe history. Yeah. I think full group meetings, unless you want to work there, you should try to keep them relatively brief and then work in smaller teams. Like endless meeting with 5 people is probably not the most productive thing. And I think it's really useful to think about how you want to use chats, Slack, or something like this, that it's not just overwhelming you with noise and you tune it out and then something important comes. Right? So split the important from the less important work. You can try to use Zulip. Has a couple of useful features, but maybe your AI summaries are useful, I don't know. And also reserve some time for socializing and celebrating success. You see this, another 3 bonus points for each milestone you can get by posting a picture of a social activity of your team after the milestone. Go to a restaurant, play a game or something. The only real requirement is move more than a few feet away from the door. So don't just go outside and say we sit in the sun. At least take a prop and pretend you're drinking coffee or something. Yeah, so there are common conflicts, and I think a lot of these can be anticipated. Have a conversation about this. In the end, really what I'm trying to communicate here is teamwork is unavoidable, so you better practice and get good at it. It's very unlikely that you can work on your own later, right? And it's a hard skill, but a skill that you can learn. And especially, I think, having hard conversation is something that's really worth practicing. So really think about expectation, be deliberate, and if things go wrong, as they will, work with it, replan, and talk about it.